To bring everybody back up to speed, if you've not heard of White Fragility, the book by Robin DiAngelo, which is on fire. It is the number one, I think, on the New York Times bestseller list. It's probably still in the top 3 of Amazon. It's raking in the dough. She learned her trade at some prestigious universities and has tenure and has gone out and into the corporate world, has become a go-to person for diversity training, equality and diversity training, which has been going on for a long time. But now there's finally one book that pops to the top of the stack, and it's hers. And I'll just briefly give you the premise, the way I see it. If you read this book, which I have done, you're immediately going to recognize a lot of things which is purely ignorance. You haven't thought about people's lives because different cultures, just different people, because we're not all one homogenous mass, although that's clearly what you would like. And the solution to these horrible feelings you will now have after reading the book is that you have to atone for your whiteness for the rest of your life. And no one else can be racist. Only the white person can be racist. And I'll even go that far with you on your social justice tip, but there's no end. You have to always be doing the work, as we established on the previous episode about a week ago. Doing the work is the code. If you are reading the book, you're doing the work. Even if you're not reading the book, you're doing the work. You say you're doing the work because then people will shut up because it's all right, he's doing the work. I thought I'd bring in Matt Taibbi with a quick 2-parter as he did an excellent deconstruction of the book on his Stack Suite, whatever that thing is called, wherever you can subscribe and pay for his articles. This was him on an interview, and we'll start with what the book recommends.
So it's funny, if you took parts of the book and just looked at the areas where she's trying to bring the attention of white people to structural inequities, to different kinds of situations that they might not be aware of because being white, you're raised in a situation where you're simply not aware of certain factors. All those things are very positive. The problem is she has this she wraps it up in this all-encompassing theory that basically says that the people are defined by their race or by the perception of their race, that these categories are inflexible, and that the only thing you can hope to do to combat the ongoing problem of racism is to relentlessly focus on race and commit to a lifelong program of striving to be less white, which it's a very strange theology, which is, I guess, becoming sort of academic mainstream now. But the book itself has a lot of very odd theories connected to some pretty uncontroversial and positive theories.
It's exactly the way I felt. It's like, okay, there's a lot of interesting stuff there about, racism that you're not aware of, or just it's ignorance, really. And what it misses is the whole nepotism angle. However, she is, as we identified, part of a movement that has been around for a long time. That is the EDI training and consultant scam.
This is the racism problem as seen through the lens of somebody who makes thousands of dollars an hour, being hired by companies to address, normally it's to address an internal toxicity issue. So what they do is they bring in these people who come from, various academic outposts, and they bring teams in, and they have trainings where they facilitate anti-racism dialogues, and employees are sort of herded into these trainings and forced to listen to these speeches. And that's the lens through which her theories come. This is how corporate America views the race problem. It views it as an individual issue where racism is sort of inexorably stuck in all of us, and the only way that we can combat it is through relentlessly listening to corporate consultants tell us how to fight it. And right. That's the irony here, is that I think the problem with this book ultimately is that this is the corporate vision of how to tackle racism. It's just to hire people like this to run through every company and search out racism in every corner, which could mean 1,000 different things that aren't necessarily good.
And as I looked into some of Robin DiAngelo's peers, This is really quite a big industry, and the Smithsonian Institute set up a whole separate website dedicated to whiteness and the problem of whiteness in America. And I was kind of chuckling because someone emailed a graphic from the website, which actually this graphic has since been removed from the website, but it's in the show notes. And you didn't know, because there was no context, you didn't know where it came from either. It's the NMAACH, which is the Natural Museum of African American Whiteness something or other, but it's part of the Smithsonian Institute on their website. And this pamphlet, you said, this is crazy. Who would put this out? And it was the aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, so this is a real thing. It's from the Smithsonian Institute on their website. And it's really interesting to see how they view what they call American whiteness. And it's like, stuff that just like it used to be an American, for an example. And I'm way out of touch, boomer possible, but under the heading competition. American whiteness consists of being number one, win at all costs, winner-loser dichotomy, action orientation, master and control nature, must always do something about a situation, aggressiveness and extroversion, decision-making, and majority rules, but only when whites have power. I mean, it's really a very sick view of race. It really is. It's just, wow.
It's got very little to do with race.
Thank you. Family structure of whiteness. The nuclear family, father, mother, 2.3 children is the ideal social unit. That's kind of ideal to keep our whole damn country alive and growing, but okay. Husband is breadwinner and head of household. Wife is homemaker and subordinate to the husband. Children should have own
When
rooms.
has that ever been?
Well, according to the Smithsonian, it's the National Museum of African American History and Culture. That's the NMAAHC, and that is part of the Smithsonian Institute. I found it rather
a very insulting sheet of paper, but it's also like some of the things that are very positive they put into a negative light. I find that to be very disturbing.
Yeah. Like American type kind of things.
Yeah.
So
people like to work for, they like to work for money.
They like to win.
What?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway, so, but on this website, there's an entire section of books for you to do the work with and videos, and front and center right there is our girl, Robin Diangelo. And I had to pull a few clips just so you can understand. She's standing in a clearly a set, but kind of like it's supposed to look a little grungy with a splash of color in the background. It's kind of a industrial looking thing. I guess it's a choice with some like purplish lighting, reddish purplish. I'm colorblind, but I can tell something was weird with it. And here is her intro to her whiteness.
I'm Dr. Robin Diangelo, and my work focuses on the question of what does it mean to be white in a society that proclaims race meaningless, yet is profoundly separated by race. And to start this off, I want to draw your attention to the fact that I'm white. So just look at me for a moment, think about it, notice it. And part of being white is that it's a very uncomfortable thing for me to do.
And I should mention that I believe this to be her standard speech. This is probably what she does inside companies because it's so easy flowing for her. I'm sure that this is how she starts her $12,000 a day
these sorts
seminars.
of things, this all stemmed back to the sensitivity training days of the 60s, and it went on and went through EST. These things are extremely not only well rehearsed, but they're designed to elicit a certain kind of emotional response as she does them. These are very
slick.
Subversive seminars. If you go into one with the right attitude, you can actually understand what's going on. You can actually get something out of it. But generally speaking, they're designed to subvert and confuse the person.
I would say this is so good, and there's specific reasons for it. Maybe even specific American reasons for it. It is so good because you have to agree with a lot of what she's saying, and you really do get sucked in. But then when it comes to the payoff, which is you're going to need me for the rest of your life, is kind of sick.
And it's taken me many, many years to be able to draw people's attention to my race and see any significance in it. And that's because as a white person, I was socialized to see race as what they had. I was just a person. I was just a white bread, a Heinz 57. I didn't have race.
Heinz 57. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
Well, how is Heinz 57, how does that equate whiteness?
It's like white bread. Would have been a better example, but Heinz 57 she used for some reason. I'm not sure what. But it's to make it's like something everyday product, commonplace. It's all over the place. It's not a big deal.
Almost generic.
Generic.
Borderline generic.
But not quite generic.
Borderline generic, but we can put a label on it.
A brand name.
I was socialized to see race as individual acts of discrimination and prejudice, individual acts that anybody could do to anybody else, and if you did those acts, you were a bad person. And that is why, since I saw myself
you
as
have
a
to
good
stop
person,
that and back it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I'm waiting for you. Yeah.
Did she say I was designed to see race?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. Now well, this is another trick they use.
Yep.
This is where you use one word where another word is the right word. You use the wrong word. She uses race instead of racism. She should have said, if I know she's doing this for a reason. This is all part of us. This is all, I don't know, what do you call it? Neuro-linguistic programming at some level.
Yeah.
And so she's doing this because it screws up your brain when she says, I've designed to see race as an act. When race is a thing and racism is the act. But she doesn't use racism. She does that for a purpose. This is very purposeful. And I want to mention that we do have one listener who's about to take this training. She's a producer. She didn't want to do it. And I had to talk her off the ledge and tell her, you got to do it. You got to get the paperwork. You got to report back. You got to write an essay.
Yes.
For the Cosmic Weenie. And because there's material here.
It's part of the Trust Network.
I would love to hear this thing because I could deconstruct this woman in a minute.
Yeah, well, there's a little bit more for you. And, of course, a new member of the Trust Network Initiative is Cosmic Weenie. We welcome them.
I was socialized to see race as individual acts of discrimination and prejudice, individual acts that anybody could do to anybody else, and if you did those acts, you were a bad person. And that is why, since I saw myself as a good person, I didn't see myself as connected to racism, and certainly didn't see myself as connected to race. In other words, I didn't have a sense of a racial identity. Today, I understand that I move through the world always in most particularly as a white person. I have a white frame of reference and I have a white experience. And part of being white is to have that be invisible to us and to be able to live our lives without ever acknowledging that, to see that as non-operative.
Okay. Any comments or move on to the next?
No, everything she's doing is just old school est.
Yeah. Well, you'll love this next one.
And I'm
S stuff. I mean, it would be, and I'm familiar with the models because I actually took a psychology course at Cal that discussed sensitivity training and made us go through a lot of it so we could understand it. And then when est came out, it was just so obvious what was going on as a brainwashing scheme, mostly to get you to keep giving them money. It's this kind of a proto sales pitch for, I don't know what it's like a religion. And,
yes.
She's doing the same thing. And it's like, it's a religion. It's become a religion. That's why people get so adamant about it. And they get all pissed off if you question it. It brings back a lot of memories. I would love to go into this with someone who used to be an S trainer. If I knew anyone, I know a couple people that were into it, but an S trainer who knew what they were doing I'd love to go to one of these seminars with them.
Because you brought it up, I'm going to play a clip out of my typical sequence from James Lindsay. James Lindsay was one of the people who submitted all those fake papers, if you recall, to the peer review process. And it was stuff like homosexuality amongst dogs and all this kind of stuff. You remember that? We played a couple of clips from it. It was
vaguely.
Yeah, and these were all peer reviewed, like great paper, fantastic. Really understand that it's lovely. There's a term for this, for what you were just describing, how people get all in on it, and he mentioned it.
There's actually a religious form of OCD that's called scrupulosity. It's very common in Catholics. It's not too. Yeah, it does. It sounds like something like. Yeah. But no, the deal is that it's religious OCD, where basically you feel like you haven't resolved your own complicity in sin correctly, and therefore you're bound for the hellfire. Right. And it's actually super common in Catholics. It's somewhat common in Mormons, and you sometimes see it in the stricter variants of Calvinism. And I don't know, it probably shows up in Islam as well. I actually just don't know on that. But it is a form of OCD where you're trying to out damn spot Lady Macbeth yourself for your complicity in sin. And I think that Diangelo, whose mother was a lapsed nun, who went on to become a leftist social activist. I do think that Diangelo, that's not even her real last name, exhibits a rather strong case of scrupulosity. And to read White Fragility is basically 157 or 8-page confession of that, and then projection of it onto all white people.
Scrupulosity. I was not familiar with the term.
I never heard the term, and when I first heard it, I thought he said screwballosity, which is what it is.
It's the same thing, scrupulosity. But I think it's, and maybe that's something that's built into the old school Judeo-Christian nature of Americans, very much the way the New Germans always have a version of scrupulosity, because the Germans come on, anybody, you're immigrants, come on in, no problem, because they have severe guilt over World War II. And it's going to take another generation or two before that may go away. So there may be something in certainly the American psyche that you can play to, and that guilt that you can just tap into whenever you want to. And that guilt is obviously the whiteness.
And I'm going to repeat that because I think it's very profound, and I really want us to sit with it.
I love that. This is such a training term. I just want you to sit with that for a moment. Just want you to sit for a moment about how white you are.
That I could live my whole life in segregation. In fact, if I followed the trajectory that my loving parents laid out for me in my good neighborhood and my good school and my good college and my good career, in which I would ideally rise to the top, I could easily never have any consistent, ongoing, authentic relationships with people of color, and not one person who guided me ever conveyed that there was loss.
I want you to just sit with that for a moment, John. Just sit with that for a second. And even better, I'd like to take you inside of it, inside your evil white skin.
And I want to take us deeper. I want to take us inside this skin. My psychosocial development was inculcated in the water of white supremacy. That is what I call this system. I don't mean the KKK. I mean a system in which whiteness and white people are central and seen as inherently superior to people of color. My personality was formed in that water. My worldview was formed in that water. I didn't choose it. It isn't my fault. I'm not racked with guilt about it. But I am responsible for changing it, because the default of our society is the reproduction of racism. It's built into every system and every institution. And if we just live our lives and carry on in the most comfortable ways for us, we will necessarily reproduce it. There is no neutral space. Inaction is a form of action.
Silence is violence. It all comes together.
This is another thing you do. This is another brain scrambling
exercise
methodology where you use these inaction is a form, or action is a form of inaction. Inaction is a form of action.
Yeah. Silence is violence.
Inaction is a form of action is the way she puts it. So So that means if you don't do anything, you're actually doing something.
That's right.
And it's bad.
Silence is violence. It's all the same people, the same thinking, tying into the same guilt that is being played on over and over again.
Silence is violence. What was the one I said to you earlier today before the show started? I had one. I just read it somewhere.
Normally all you say is, don't touch the knobs then.
Yes, that's what I say every time. Why you keep fiddling with this thing? I'm not
fiddling with the thing. So before I continue to a very different Robin DiAngelo, and noteworthy, I could not find it noteworthy that James Lindsay says that's not even her real name. Could not find her real name. And let's just take and before we do that, from the same Smithsonian website is a woman named Bell Hooks. So just so you have an idea that it's more than just Robin DiAngelo's white fragility, there's some very common theme underneath all of this.
I began to use the phrase in my work, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, because I wanted to have some language that would actually remind us continually of the interlocking systems of domination that define our reality.
And it's because of this attitude that this is an anti-men thing. It's anti-white man. They only speak to women. It's right here. It's the white supremacist patriarchy. And why does it always have to be the patriarchy that's thrown in there? Maybe we've evolved a little bit. Unlikely, but maybe we've evolved a little bit. It's just very irksome to me. So, yeah, but so it's always
men. It's a real target.
They always men hate.
Huh. Yeah, you got to hate men, otherwise you won't get. It puts more women into the lesbian pool for dating. As referred to earlier, the Jewish friend. Tina's Jewish friend's really afraid of Trump, going to come after Jews, Trump, the anti-Semites, and they're going to get all over. So she starts talking about something. I said, can I just say that there is some real anger, and there's only one group that everyone seems to be against, is straight old white men. And she says, well, that's not. I said, have you listened to the news? White men, old white men, straight white men, cis white men, old cis white men. Have you not heard that? Well, you can't deny. And from there, I just tuned out. Yeah, I tuned out. It's like, but ding, you should have had your bell. Well, and I think it's worth repeating. The only correct response to anything like that, where you are accused of having privilege or just being white, is to say the following. As someone who has done the work, I'm surprised you would use your privilege to assume that I'm white. Okay, so I thought you were supposed to protect men, but you're not protecting anybody. So Robin DiAngelo. I am here to protect man. As we look at the Wikipedia entry, just briefly, she's September 8th, 1956. She's Virgo. American academic, lecturer, and author working in the fields of critical discourse analysis and whiteness studies. She's formerly served as a tenured professor of multicultural education at Westfield State University and is currently an affiliate associate professor of education at the University of Washington. She's known for her work pertaining to white fragility. Now, her credentials: she received her PhD in multicultural education from the University of Washington. And her dissertation. That's a non-degree. Her PhD committee was chaired by James A. Banks. Oh, let's be careful here. What else? So she's joined there. She's also named Associate Professor of Multicultural Education. Holds 2 honorary doctoral degrees. All right, fine. Well, let's listen to a little bit about her youth growing up.
I grew up poor and white in the Bay Area. Okay. We moved frequently.
Figures.
I think from a very early age, I had a very deep sense of shame. I will never forget a moment in which, 2 moments in fact, one in which a teacher held my hand up in front of the class as an example of poor hygiene and told me to go home and tell my mother to wash me.
What you're going to hear is the amount of trauma this person has. She has a lot of personal trauma, and I'm going to tell you right now, I feel she's projecting.
My mom was a single mom. She had 3 children. She was sick.
Lots of reasons to hate men in this, by the way.
And she literally couldn't house, feed, or clothe us. So I was dirty. The other moment was visiting a friend of hers, some lady, when you're a kid and you get taken to somebody's house and they have kids, so you're playing. And on the way out, I was the last one out the door, and I overheard one of their children ask her mother, "What's wrong with them?" That was her question. What's wrong with them? And I stopped, riveted, like I wanted to hear. And her mother put her finger to her lips and said, "Shh, they're poor." That was a revelatory moment. That was a moment when I realized there's something about us that everyone can see that's shameful, but that should not be named.
I mean,
where was her white privilege?
When I heard this, I'm like, no wonder it didn't get any better.
At the same time, I also always knew I was white. Oh. And I knew that it was better to be white.
Things I never thought of as a kid.
I can remember seeing food left out, uneaten. And I was hungry, and I would reach for it, maybe out in a park, on a picnic table or something. And I would be admonished by my mother, "Don't touch that. You don't know who touched it. It could have been a colored person."
Now, I don't know, man. That doesn't sound that believable to me. This just...
Which was the language of the time. And the message was clear. If a colored person touched it, it would be dirty.
There's her connection.
I was actually dirty. But in those moments, I wasn't poor anymore. In those moments, I was white. We used, if you will, Black people to project our shame onto, to realign us with the dominant white culture that our poverty separated us from.
Right.
What do you think is wrong with her when you hear this? Besides a lot.
She's pissed off.
I think it's a lot of projection. She wants the rest of the world to atone for her shitty childhood or something like that. There's some underlying stuff that is just cannot be ignored.
Still eating at her. She wouldn't be telling these stories.
And whiteness is not her only problem.
When I used my white position to break with silence and white solidarity and speak up, I am simultaneously healing the lie that I am inherently inferior because I grew up poor.
Right.
So for me to center race, even though I experienced oppression and have experienced oppression in other aspects of my life, for me to center race
depression
and feed every other identity or experience through that lens has been the most profound tool, if you will.
So this is her process, her therapy is to do this because she was depressed. She's saying it right there. I was depressed, and by doing this work, I feel good again. It is the genesis of her guilt gene. Anyway, 2 more clips. She's got some outstanding advice.
But hope is such a tool in a way of whiteness, and we've dangled that tool in front of Black people for 400 years, and we keep not showing up in the long term.
Hope has been dangled in front of Black people for years. You evil, evil white people, how can you do that?
I've never been more hopeful about our future.
Evil white people.
I've never been more hopeful about America. And I ask you to sustain that hope. I'm not talking about blind optimism. The kind of hope that just ignores the enormity of the tasks ahead or the roadblocks that stand in our path. I'm not talking about the wishful idealism that allows us to just sit on the sidelines or shirk from a fight. I have always believed that hope is that stubborn thing inside us that insists.
I mean, come on.
Dangler in chief.
Dangler in chief Obama. Mr. Hope literally dangling it in front of black people. What a horrible, horrible man.
It must be white.
All right.
See, this is you performed very well considering all the promotion I put in that newsletter.
I have a kicker for you. Here's the kicker. Obviously, everyone needs to be doing the work. This is very important. You have to do the work. But this work comes with a stark warning. Do not. Yes, there's a problem. It's a marketing problem, which we know. It's not really something she wants to say in that manner, but people are going off and starting their own do the work groups.
Oh, no, you can't do that.
We also have to figure out
how... It takes money away from the main group. It hurts them.
Here she is.
We also have to figure out how to do that work in accountable ways. Yes. I am a little nervous about like how many people now are like, oh, I read your book and now I want to start a book study or I want to start a workshop. And, it takes years of experience and study and struggle and mistake making and trust building. I mean, to hold a group around race and really hold that group and push them and help them go where they need to go in ways that are constructive. It takes a lot of experience. So we just have to also think. This isn't the maybe format to give the answer to accountability.
She made a mistake.
We need to be asking ourselves that.
I am the chosen one. You cannot do this without me.
She's made a mistake by doing that book. Werner Erhard never did a book.
Yeah, I think you're right. She just screwed the pooch. People are off doing their own work. No. It takes years and years. But you know what it takes to talk to a group about our race? This is snake oil. But it's very effective. Women around the world are all into this, and it's okay. I mean, it's very good to be aware and not be ignorant about other groups and cultures. We're all Americans. But this guilt thing has got to stop. And it will only stop when people freak out.
We'll see how it goes, but it always ends poorly for the show, for the person that's running the whole thing.
Does it always?
I think so.
Are they trying to be like a cult leader?
Well, I mean, you end up like L. Ron Hubbard, where the government goes after you. You end up on a boat. You can't get off, and you're stuck there for the rest of your life until you die. That's not, it's comfy, but so what?
Well, right now, the only problem she has to deal with is two podcasters who are ridiculing her. So I'm sure she'll be okay.
I'm sure there'll be a lot more people ridiculing her over time.